All right. So I'm Ethan. I do board games. I curate the school page where I met Matt, and I do board game design. Haven't advanced as far as Matt in the board game design. I've done some self-publishing as far as like publishing some stuff on some of those print and play sites, but I have not done the full gambit. And so today we're actually going to be talking to Matt about how to do that full gambit from the beginning to the end. I kind of titled the document that I sent you with the questions "Soup to Nuts," and a lot of people might not be familiar with what that's referring to. But when you have a full course meal, you start with the soup, and supposedly you end with the nuts. I've never finished a meal with eating nuts. At
I'm more
least
of a
not
dessert guy
intentionally.
personally, but
Yeah, yeah, me too. But maybe it's dessert nuts. Maybe it's I don't know, some kind of nice
pecan pie or
nut.
something.
Yeah, exactly. Pecan pie. Uh, so yeah, before we started, I was kind of asking you about you have your own business with a couple other guys, right? You're saying it's sort of a sole proprietorship with some other guys. I don't know if that's the best place to start. Do you think there's a better place to start? I think my first question was what got you interested in board games to start with, and specifically what interested you in board game design. Do you think that's a better place to start, or I think that's probably a better place to start? What do you
Yeah,
think?
probably. I think it's funny. I interviewed Jamie Stegmaier a couple of weeks ago for my podcast, and
Oh, cool.
because we reviewed Vantage on the podcast, and so I had him on, and we did a little bit, just kind of a 20-minute interview that I kind of slid into our podcast, which was really cool to chat with him. I guess I'm going on a little bit of side tangent to start, but
No, it's all
Jamie
good. Manage
Stegmaier,
is an
great,
incredible game.
what a great dude.
Yeah, what a great dude too. Yeah.
Like I was basically just shooting my shot, I messaged him I DM'd him on Instagram, and I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
I got a podcast and we're reviewing Vantage, any chance you'd be interested in joining us and doing an interview? And like 4 minutes later he responds, absolutely, sure, let's do it, and
Wow. Wow.
and was super gracious with his time. So anyways, side tangent, Jamie Stegmaier, great dude. But the reason I brought him up is because when I asked him a very similar question that you just asked me, he basically had almost the same answers as myself. And that is that, like, from a very, very early age was interested in board games, and at that time it was the clues and the risks and the monopolies and that stuff and risk and whatnot. And when I asked him about his journey in board game design, and when he first decided that designing was something he wanted to do and all that stuff, his answer was the same as mine would have been if somebody asked me that question, was that, like, I started designing games without even realizing I was doing so super early in probably my teens. And that is that it was just iterations on games I was already playing. And what I mean by that is, I specifically remember having played Axis and Allies as probably a 13 or 14-year-old with a couple of my buddies, and thinking, oh, this would be really cool if, oh, this would be really cool if, and then literally started drawing on a big piece of paper, a map, and started, like, going through my old toys and finding army men and finding toy cars and finding whatever. And honestly, I don't think that ever made it to the table. I don't think I ever actually played it, but I do very distinctly remember doing that. And it's like, now I think back on it, it feels, maybe a little bit embarrassing, but I guess that was probably the roots of my game design journey. I don't, I did a little bit of that and messing around with existing games and just making my own version, as a teenager. And then probably didn't even consider or look at designing games until, 5-6 years ago when I started designing Kuiperium. But yeah, I was always big into board games, and it was mostly those, like, classic mass market games. And then in 2017, 16, 17, somewhere around there, I got hooked into TCG, or CCG. I don't know what the difference between those things are. But anyways, Star Wars Destiny, a collectible card game,
Yeah.
trading card game. I mean, I guess it's all the same. So I started playing Star Wars Destiny and got really obsessed with it and played it kind of religiously for
Mm.
2-3 years and got really hardcore into it. Did a little bit of podcasting about it. Traveled to the World Championships. Like, I did the whole thing with that game.
Wow.
And then yeah, that game kind of died, and when that game died, I started. I guess what probably happened was that through that game and being with other gamers is where I discovered the modern board gaming hobby. And through the standard stuff like Catan and Ticket to Ride, and those were my first game where I was like, oh, board games can be like more. Like there's more games in the world. So yeah, that's probably my board game journey. And then from there, I just got obsessed with board gaming and grew a massive collection and multiple games nights per week and that kind of thing. So that's kind of like outside of the designing stuff, that's kind of my board game journey. And then for the last 5, 6, 7 years, been fairly obsessed about the hobby to the point where I design my own game and I'm designing my own stuff and starting a quote unquote publishing company and all that. So yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, no, I definitely, it resonates, right? Because I remember, I think Risk was my go-to game, and I remember making I think it was a Europe map, just on like a big huge piece of cardboard, pasting construction paper, inventing like my own rules of how you'd move around the map. And so totally, I feel like that's often the origin story, right? And then it's usually someone plays Catan and they're like, whoa, what's going on here? And I think for me it actually might have been a modified version of Risk. I think it was I think Avalon Hill came out with like, we called it 80 Risk, but I think it's something else. But it's like the futuristic Risk where they add like water territories in the moon, and you have like different leaders. Yeah. Anyways, that kind of, I think that kind of started sparking it, and then of course then you get introduced to the Euro game, and your perspective changes.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess with that, with the design aspect, was there a process of like, I know for me, like I got way too way ambitious. Like the first game that I tried to design was just like, it was so complicated. There were so many moving parts and it was so messy. And I remember like sitting down to do like a play test with someone, and it was like, I was like, I think they hate me now because I just made them sit for 3 hours playing this monstrosity, and it wasn't
probably
fun.
Getting nowhere.
Getting nowhere. So I guess, was that kind of your experience with starting designing games?
A little bit actually. I remember at some point I decided I'd like to like try my hand at designing games because I have some ideas and I have some thoughts, and every time I played a game I thought it would spark ideas and thoughts like, oh, this game would be really cool if, like that sort of thing. But it was more than just like, oh, a different version of this, or a differently themed version of this, which was the original kind of thoughts. But I think the first idea of game design, I think, came as an inspiration from Raiders of the North Sea. I don't know if you've played that one, but basically, it's a worker placement game where you're either placing workers to gather resources, build your team, set things up, or if you've done that properly, and you can take a raiding turn where you actually go raid a village if you've met all the qualifications, and then you get a bunch of resources and bonuses and points and whatever from that. So you're like prep, attack, prep, attack, prep. So that's kind of the flow of the game, right? And I remember that sparking an idea of making a heist game with a similar kind of like I guess flow, except instead of like prep attack, the idea was that I wanted to spend 80% of the time and treat it and have it feel like a heist movie. So I wanted to spend 80% of the time prepping and organizing and putting your team together and scouting the location and getting your hacker ready and like practicing with your safecracker and getting the right getaway vehicle and getting the right driver. And like I wanted to spend like 80% of the game prepping. And then the last 20% of the game, I wanted to be this like palm sweaty, like intense, like, am I going to make it kind of feeling that you get when you watch a heist movie, right? That last act is always like this super tense, like, are they going to pull it off? So I wanted to do a similar thing that like, Raiders of the North Sea was doing, but just like once, right? Prep, go for it. So then that was my first idea for a game, and I started designing it, and it was the first thing I'd ever designed, first thing I ever tried to do. And Same as you. Super convoluted. Like I made this like crazy map and just like spent probably way too much time trying to put this playable game together. I had no idea about like the design journey and like the design kind of like the A to Z of design and what you should be doing, right? I just kind of like threw a bunch of stuff onto paper, onto pen and paper or whatever, and then like we went for it with my buddy Steve, who's now my game design partner. And yeah, it was like convoluted and long and wasn't really getting anywhere, and it wasn't working at all, right? And I remember at that time I was listening to the Board Game Design Lab podcast,
Yeah.
which a lot of people, if they're in this community, this school community with you, they're probably familiar with that, and if they're not, they should be.
Yes.
But I listened to like every single one of those podcasts because I'm like, I want to try my hand at game designing. And one of the big main messages that really stuck out to me as a rookie designer, somebody who had never made a game, and you know, I think this message is really important for anybody who even maybe has made a game or has started on their journey. I think this is really important. 2 points. One is start small.
Yeah.
Don't go crazy. You know, for your first game, make a little card game. Do something that just so you can get from soup to nuts of a board game, of designing a board game, you know, without any of them. Like, you don't want to spend 3, 4, 5, 6 years designing your first game, probably. You probably want to just get from A to Z with a small game and get it out there. Because then you have that experience and you know what the next step is going to be and you know what to expect, and you have all these like aha moments that you can have with a small game instead of a big game. And one of the other main reasons that I thought that message was super important is just if you're planning on self-publishing. I don't know how deep we want to go into like the publishing side of things.
Yeah,
but
I think it'll be good to cover some of it, but not probably.
Sure, yeah, we won't go too crazy on it, but all that to say, like, we did want to self-publish. You know, it was our first game that we were making. It was my first game, you know, and it was sort of like, oh, this is my baby, and I don't want to just sign it off to somebody else. So keeping small made it so that if there was a mistake made, if I went to crowdfunding and there was a misprint on a card, or there was an issue of some kind, it's going to cost you thousands of dollars, maybe at worst. Whereas if you try to make this huge like minis and like this huge board and tons of components and blah blah blah, you make a mistake on something big and it's likely to cost you tens of thousands of dollars. So that was one of the main messages that I got from the Board Game Design Lab podcast, was like, start small. And that's when I kind of shifted away from this heist game, because I knew if I wanted to do it the way that I wanted it to feel, that it was going to be this like big game, right? So I'm starting to work on that game now a lot more seriously, 5-6 years later, after having designed a couple of smaller games and making Kuiperium and having gone through all the motions. And now I feel way more comfortable to attack this big beast of a board game, you know, than I would have to start out. So that's probably my main message. And then the other thing is, like, regardless of the size of your game or what you're making, start small. And what I mean by that, and again, if you've listened to the BGDL podcast, the MVP is probably a term that you are very familiar with as well. I don't know if you want to just give the people a quick recap of what exactly that means.
The MVP. Actually, you might have to do it because
Sure.
I'm sure you jog my memory on it.
I'm sure you're very familiar with the concept and the idea.
Yes.
But the acronym means minimum viable product.
Yes.
So you want to make the most simplified minimum version of your game.
Yes.
And just throw it on the table as quickly as possible. Because you have an idea, and even though it might sound big and bombastic and full of stuff, like, strip it down. What's the core? What's the core of your game? What's gonna breathe life into this game? When people sit down to play it, what's the elevator pitch that they're gonna give to their friend to say, like, come play this game with me? It's that, you know, when I play a card, I'm creating a worker placement for my opponent. Okay. Like, and that's the hook of Kuiperium, right? We can get into that in a bit.
Yeah.
But, you know, so that was the MVP. It was like, how can I create a game that has that mechanism in it, that is the simplest possible version of it? So Steve and I created, I think, 5 cards. And then we just did like So super simple, like, and they had the simplest of abilities, and we just like printed 5 versions of each of those cards. So like you drew your hand, and your hand made no sense. It was like 4 of the same card and 2 of
Yeah.
another card. Like it was, but we were able to like sit down and play a few turns
Yeah.
and go through the motions, and we realized it's not a good game yet. It doesn't need to be. And that's probably the whole point of the MVP, the minimum viable product, is like, don't make it fun, make it work. Just
Yes.
throw it on the table and make it work, so that you can play a few turns and be like, oh, there's something here. This is actually pretty neat. And we can expand on this. Or this doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work because of XYZ. Let's pivot. So I think those are the 2 main things that I think I got that kind of set me on the right path, 5-6 years ago when I first started designing games. Was keep it small for your first game or two, and just get a game made. Even if it doesn't have to be published, but like make a game and make it finished, and keep it small so that you can get it out there and you're done with it. And 2 is like, start with an MVP.
Yeah, and I think that's super important because, right, I think this actually applies to like a lot of different creative spheres, right? Even if you're creating a story, like sometimes you get stuck on like a very simple idea. And I think it was listening to something about how the whole series Narnia, you might be familiar with it, was started. I think C.S. Lewis saw a picture, it was like a painting of a fawn in a forest next to a lantern, and he got so stuck on that idea. And right, and it was that base simple like idea of like, this is sort of the concept that we're going for, and then out of that he was able to then riff off of that into to make this whole universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what you want to do with that MVP, right?
Yep.
Minimum viable product is, yeah, really just kind of keeping that very very simple, and that's what really ended up for me as well. Is I ended up looking at one of those. I think it was the Button Shy 18 card game. I think the first one that I submitted. Oh no, actually, I didn't end up submitting the first time there was a contest, because I finished editing, like creating the whole game, and then I looked at their rules, and they were like, "Don't make a game where you make like where you're competing across 3 lanes." And I was like, "Oh man, my game is competing across 3 lanes," and I was like, "Well, I
Oops.
probably won't even submit it." Yeah.
Yeah, you still made a game.
Still made a game, and that was the great part about it, is like from beginning to end, and I was able to sit down and play it within 15 minutes with family and friends, and got a little bit of enjoyment out of it. And all of a sudden that kind of gave me the idea of like, from the beginning to the end. And even with the current game that I just submitted to the Button Shy competition, yeah, like you said, it was the first version. It was probably, I think even the version it currently is, it's only like, I think it's 4 cards repeated 4 times,
Okay.
and those cards are then and the first version I made was very simple, like it was numbers on paper, and maybe a little bit of text saying do this or this does this. And then those, you sit down, and the funny thing is, I actually sit down with my daughter, who's only 4 years old, and I just hand her a hand of cards, because she's willing participant, like she's 100% willing to
That's
go
awesome.
for it. And she just sits there, and I go, well, play that one, play that one, and then I play it, and it just kind of gets that feeling of I get to spend some quality time with my daughter, and then I also get to lay out some cards on the table. So yeah, that very just minimum basic of what your game is, super important to start out with, and it gives you your loop. It gives you what you want your game to drive at. And I think even with Merchant Kings, it was similar. I started with like a very small slice of like, this is what I want people to experience. I want them to feel like they're building a ship, and in building that ship, that gives them different bonuses for stuff. So great. So I guess that kind of brings us down to like choosing ideas. So when we get an idea, right? I think I was talking about this today on just like, I do a little blurb on the school site, where I just kind of talk through like a little, just like a small snippet of a concept about board game design. And so I was talking about ideas, right? And you getting stuck on an idea, because that's really what drives making a game, right? You get stuck on an idea, and then that drives you to wanting to finish that idea, So what kind of got you stuck on this idea of Kuiperium, or was there like a different idea that kind of started with and then it became Kuiperium, the space game that it is now, or
Right.
how did that happen?
So it started as like I was in the middle of, or in the middle, at the very beginning of designing that heist game. And it, I was excited about it, but I felt a little bit lost, and like, this is like, it just seemed like a monster of a thing to try to accomplish. But I didn't really know any better, and I was just going to try to push forward with it. And then as I'm listening to, I keep referencing the Board Game Design Lad, but it's a huge part of my origin story as a game designer.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it was just like the make a small game, start small, and I thought, okay, maybe I'll start small. And so I started just like brainstorming ideas, and like whether it was in the shower or doing dishes or mowing the lawn, I was just, trying to think of iterations on things. What can I do that's like unique in the, deck building world? What could I do that's unique? What's different, Instead of building a deck, maybe you're trying to destroy your deck. I was just kind of like spitballing ideas like that, And then worker placement was the one where I was like, I love worker placement games. It's probably my favorite. If I had to pick one mechanic, it would probably be that. And so I was like, worker placement, but what,
Yeah.
And I very specifically remember the moment, and it was literally a shower thought. I was in the shower. And I thought, okay, worker placement, but what? Worker placement, but my opponent controls the locations I can go to. Or like creates the locations I can go to. And so I thought, well, how would I do that? Okay, so maybe it's a tableau builder, and it's a tableau builder where I'm building my tableau to achieve the thing that I want to achieve, and my opponent's building their tableau to achieve the thing they need to achieve. But every time you play a card, it creates a worker placement location that only my opponent can use against me or for their own gain. And so that was the seed. That was the original idea. There was nothing else. There was no space mining. There was no, there was no track. There was no race. There was no, it's a 2-player game. There was nothing else. It was just that. It was like tableau building, worker placement location. I can only place my worker on my opponent's cards and vice versa. So I thought that would create an interesting point of tension where, like, every time I would go to play a card, I'm like, oh, this is great for me. But oh, no, wait, hang on a second. This is actually really great for my opponent right now. Maybe I'll hang on to that one. Okay, let's play this one instead. Oh, no, wait, that's not good. Can't play that. My opponent would eat me alive with that. Okay, maybe I'll play this one, And so that's the kind of like tension that I wanted to try to build towards. So that was the seed of the idea. There was no theme. There was nothing else. It was just like my tableau versus your tableau with worker placement. And then so I just pitched it to Steve, again, my design partner. And I thought, this seems like a pretty interesting idea. Seems unique in the space. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. So why don't we, build on that and play with that a little bit? And he liked the idea right off the bat. And the first kind of thing that came out of his mouth was like, it's a battling game, hit points and like whatever. And I thought, there's a million of those games, like head to head, 2 players, battling game where my guy versus your guy. And, and I thought, let's do something different than that, But that was it, we just went back and forth, and he had the great idea of like worker placement, but instead of placing your worker, it's a recall. So when you place your worker, you get nothing. When you're ready, recall your workers, and that's when you get all the stuff. So he had that idea, and I thought, oh, that creates even more tension of like, I place my worker there. I'm like, broadcasting that this is what I want, where I put my worker. Yeah. This is what I want. I'm broadcasting it. So there's even more tension, and my opponent has the opportunity to maybe mess with my worker, remove my worker, remove that card, and make it so I can't afford to get the action from that location by messing with my resources, whatever, right? Like these kinds of things. So yeah, we started, just brainstorming and developing it. And it was like, okay, let's make the minimum viable product out of this. And so we designed like 4 or 5 cards, super simple. And we had no idea where this game was going, but it was, let's just design 4 or 5 cards and throw it on the table. And so we did. And it was like, okay, this area of the game doesn't really feel right or fun, but this area does. This area builds towards that tension. So then we focused more on that. and then slowly but surely. And what ended up happening is this was like right at the height of the pandemic,
Yeah.
so we didn't have much else to do with our time, our spare time. And so the two of us literally obsessed about it, and we thought about nothing but Kuiperium. And I want to say within 2 months, we were probably about 85% of where the game is now, design wise. Obviously not
That's
like
incredible.
not like graphic design, art, et cetera, but like design wise, we were probably about 80 to 85% of where the game is now within a couple of months, because we spent like all of our spare time thinking about it and doing nothing but that. So, not to set expectations that you should be able to like
No.
hammer a game out in a couple of months. If it was like our normal schedule of like working and everything else, it probably would have taken us closer to 6 months, 4 to 6 months. But just to, set those expectations.
Yeah.
I think I'd ever expect to design a game like Kuiperium in 2 months ever again, working full time and everything like that. But yeah, that was sort of the origin story of Kuiperium, such as it is.
That's really cool. So, yeah, I mean, there's something to be also said just about creating a two-player game, right? Because that also makes it easier. When you're only dealing with like two variables, it makes it easier, right? As soon as you add a third, fourth player, things kind of just get more complicated.
Yeah, not only does it get messier in like the design process and making sure that it works for more players, but I don't need playtesters. Like
Yes.
Steve and I would just get together every night for 2, 3, 4 hours
Yeah.
and playtest and iterate and playtest and iterate and playtest and iterate, and we didn't need anybody else. So now like we're designing a trick taking game and we're like, okay, playtest, iterate, schedule the next playtesting session. Okay, in 3 days from now we can get together, and because we found a couple of people and we're going to playtest it. Okay, then we playtest, and then it's iterate, and then like next week we can get together again. So it's like it can't just be Steve and I playtesting a trick taking game where we need at least 3 to 5 people to play. So yeah, the two player thing definitely expedited the whole thing for us.
Do you think that also it like creating a game where, because it seems like you kind of take the approach where you start with mechanics and then you kind of build the theme off of that, right? Do you think that maybe the creation process might be faster doing it that way instead of coming up with a theme and then trying a bunch of different mechanics to try to see what fits? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's probably more just a function of how your own brain works, because I say that I think mechanics first, and for Kuiperium it was, and for Fermi Paradox, which is the trick taking game I'm working on now, it was 100% mechanics. There's barely a theme there. I mean, it's a trick taking game, so
Yeah, exactly.
We are like, now that we've developed this trick taking game, we are making some minor adjustments to make it feel a little bit more thematic. But yeah, it was a mechanics first design for sure. So the two games that actually exist that I've designed were 100% mechanics first, and the game that has been stuck in my brain for 5, 6, 7 years now, that I'm slowly pouring more of myself into now, was a theme first. But it's also a huge portion of the reason why that one's delayed is the size of it. Like it's a massive undertaking, and something that I don't expect to have done probably for a couple more years if I can consistently be working on it, during that time. So yeah, I think it's just more a function of the way that your brain works. Like if you're super passionate about a theme and you want to make a game about it, I imagine that would be the best. That would be the best approach, is be like, what serves the theme best? What mechanics serve the theme best? I haven't done that yet, so I can't speak too much of it. But yeah, I hopefully this heist thing works out, because that was definitely like started with a feeling. I wanted the feeling of like building towards something for a long time, and then the tension of executing that thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's like almost all theme. And then it's like, how do what mechanics work best to like serve that theme? So that's where I'm at now with that one.
That's really cool. Yeah, I definitely have some of those games as well. I think, yeah, I have one actually. It's kind of sounds similar in the sense where it's like a build up, but I don't know. Have you ever watched the movie Flight of the Phoenix, or at least heard of it? Anyways, it was a film that came out I think back in the '60s or something like that, and then they did a remake in the early 2000s, and it's based off of a book where these guys they crash in a desert and they have to rebuild their plane to get out of the desert.
Okay,
So it kind of
cool.
already sounds like, I think it's one of those cooperative games like the Sinking Island one, like Lost
Sure,
Island.
yeah.
But yeah, but I wanted the game to sort of be that way where you're building this airplane the whole time with everybody, and then the last bit of the game is trying to get the airplane off the ground and see if you
Mm,
actually can get the airplane off the ground. And you kind of
cool.
make the points through that process while you're trying to get the airplane off the ground. But once again, it's one of those games I started, realized it's too big for my britches. I needed to stick that on the design shelf for a while and just do some more simple games to get somewhere else. So very cool. So I think yeah, we've kind of raced through some of these. So what do you do for prototyping? What does like your early prototyping look like as far and then as you progress, like what does your later prototyping look like? I guess we can kind of go through that.
Yeah, I don't really have like there's no game design people where I am, or very little, and there's no community for game design, I guess is what I'm getting to in my physical location. So I'm like fully online is
Yeah.
where I live, in terms of game design. Once I get a game that's playable, I'll often bring it out for my game group. Like
Okay.
when I have a game night, for example, I'll say like, hey, do you guys mind, just what's the word I'm looking for? Humoring me
Yeah.
for 40 minutes while we play this like trick taking game. Or if it was earlier in the design, it was like, okay, can we just play a hand or two, just so
Yeah.
that I can get an idea of how it plays in a physical space with people and see people's facial reactions and how, whatever. So I've did a little bit of that, but it's mostly online. So, I'll design the cards, the components myself, and then I just uploaded it into TTS was the main
Okay.
tabletop simulator was my
Yep.
main kind of go-to for Kuiperium. For card games now, I'm using PCIO,
Okay.
which is like just it's mostly just card games. A super simple, website that you can use for free where you can upload cards and you can use resources and stuff. It's fairly simple, but it works really well. And
Oh, cool.
it's the main go-to space for trick game designing, is what
Oh, cool.
I've learned recently. So yeah, a little bit of that, and obviously I do a little bit of I'll print out cards and cut them up and sleeve them. Throw an actual playing card in the sleeve with it to give it some rigidity. I'm sure we've all done that
All been
as
there.
game
Yeah.
designers, but yeah, it's mostly online, mostly tabletop simulator, and recently a lot of PCI and a little bit in person as well. But yeah, mostly online.
Yeah, those kind of platforms are most people like own tabletop simulator for some reason or another, and so
Yeah,
you can usually find someone who's willing to jump in a game and try them. And yeah, I think I did that for a couple of my games. I think I did it for Merchant Kings probably the most, but yeah, I think I do mainly print them out and play with them. I like to design, and so like I get into I think I've got the Affinity Suite, and so I get in there and I actually make my layouts, and then I put it into I think is it Card Creator, which is another Steam app, and I think it's actually
right.
it's connected with Tabletop
Yeah, it's
Simulator.
the Java program or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And so I kind of just put it in there just for layouts so I can make my print and plays because it does it really fast where you just lay them all out and just you can export it and print them. So I think those are some for those who are listening, like those are some really good all of those are really good resources for just like play testing and kind of getting that first prototype because really like and I know you'll probably echo this is like getting that prototype to the table is probably one of the most important parts of game design, right? You can write your ideas out all day and it's not going to do you any good, right? And I think once again we talk about the board game design lab. I think that was one of the biggest takeaways for me was like, man, I could sit there and write these ideas around all day. Like I've got endless ideas as far as board games go. But when it comes down to it, like actually getting a physical something representation of the cards and the pieces onto the table, even if it's pennies or whatever you're finding around your house, that's crucial to actually making a viable product.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll echo that, and I'll say like the step of, even if it's just an MVP, even if it's the
Mm.
simplest, dumbest version of the game that you want,
Yeah.
the point where you actually print something or create something and put it on the table and play it, even if it's again the dumbest version,
Yeah.
is such a huge, huge, huge step. Honestly, because as soon as you stick a game on the table and it's something you made and you take a couple turns and it's sort of kind of maybe a little bit works, where
Yeah.
you can kind of envision where it could go, that is a addictive drug that will bury itself into your soul, and that's all you'll want to do is like iterate and make it better and make it better and make it better. So I find that like in some of the conversations that I've had, there's a lot of people who have great ideas. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Everybody's got tons of ideas. And and that's why you'll see all the time in this community, not necessarily your school community, but I mean in the board game design community,
Yes.
you'll get the question asked all the time, and you see it posted on Facebook and whatnot
Mm.
all the time. I have an idea. Should I trademark it? Should I protect it somehow?
Mm.
I don't want to share it too much or blah, blah, blah. Like, no, man, everybody
Yeah.
has ideas.
Yeah.
Your idea is not worth any more than Buddy's idea next door, because everybody's got a million ideas. And until you can actually take that idea and make us, again, you can make the
Yeah.
dumbest version of it. Doesn't matter. Now it's actually something. It's nothing until it's on the table. And that's one of the things that I learned too. And as soon as I put my MVP out of Kuiperium, as dumb as it was,
Mhm.
I immediately, got addicted to wanting to make it better. So yeah, if I have any message for new people, it's like, don't covet your ideas. Like, throw them out there and
Yeah.
and work on them and just get them to the table.
Yeah, and it is crazy how that is such a motivator, right? Just getting to the table, realizing, man, like I've got to make order. I've got to organize this thing, right? Like I think that's the hardest thing. Like you make your baby, right? And you put it on the table. You're like, it's not crawling. It's not
It
going
doesn't
anywhere.
work at all.
I got to get it. Got to get some legs under this thing. And so, yeah, 100%, man. That's been my experience as well. Like I think it was Merchant Kings when I got it to the table the first time and it just completely failed, right? And I I made this great little like map and it's like that, and I brought it down and I put it before my dad and my sister, and my dad was like, "Wait, if I did this," and I was like,
There it goes.
broken.
Yeah.
It's completely broken.
Yep.
And then it was from there. It was like I was completely focused on like how do I unbreak this? Like you said, it's like a little addictive thing that it was like even though it was like maybe half an hour a day that I could spend on it, that half an hour was well utilized time because I was ultra focused on trying to get that prototype.
Yeah, and to like nail the point down of the importance of an MVP, and when I say MVP, I mean minimal viable product,
Exactly.
is like, imagine, Ethan, if you had poured 100 hours into that game and
Yes.
didn't go minimum. You just tried to
No.
make a whole game and threw it on the table, and then your dad went, well, if I do this and this, I just win, right? And then you spent all that time for nothing. Like, this system doesn't
Yes.
work. Nothing works here. And so you
No.
got to restart from scratch, and like hundreds of hours are wasted. So that's kind of another kind of point of like how important, why it's so important to go with that MVP before you do anything else.
Exactly. All right. So, yeah, I think we kind of talked through some of the do and don'ts of prototyping. We talked about the method of design for Kuiperium. So, I guess when it comes down to it, are you design multiple games at once? Like I've heard, right, in the board game design sphere, there's some people that they're working on like 5 games all at the same time. And I obviously like they probably like have dedicated focus to one game for a while, and then they kind of maybe shift to another one when they're like
Right.
they kind of maybe hit a roadblock with this one. Is that your experience as well? Do you have like a lot of irons in the fire? Tell me about
Not
that.
a ton. I feel like that's probably a really good approach to find the thing that's going to catch fire with you, right? Like when I had the idea for Kuiperium, it caught fire with us right away, and we obsessed over it, and we did nothing but that for 2 years, really.
Yeah.
Like the first couple of months was getting to that first kind of like 80% of getting the game working, and then the rest of the time was tweaking and balancing, and then like art and graphic design, because we self-published and all that too.
Wow.
So yeah, like I think it's and I'm just speaking from my own experience, and I only have one game self-published, and I have two or three other games that I have like that exist in some form.
Yeah.
So I'm not an super experienced person here. I'm mostly just kind of like sharing what my experience has been and what's worked for me. So I imagine that if you don't have a game right now that's like caught fire with you, and that, like, I guess I'll say it this way: if I didn't have a game that was on fire with me, that I just wanted to just focus on, right? And I have one of those right now, which is our trick taking game that we're working really hard on, that we're just working on fine tuning and balancing at this point. And then, I have this heist game that's obviously like been on my mind and just won't go away. But if I didn't have anything that was like jumping out at me, I think that would probably be a really good approach to like any idea you have, throw it on paper and make an MVP and just try to get it to the table. And you do that with 3, 4, 5, 6 games, and then eventually like one of them will be like, this is cool, this works really well, and I'm going to focus on this one to expand it and whatever. So if you don't have a game that you're obsessing over and that you really want to focus on and hone in on, I imagine that's probably a really good approach, to just be like, let's make a bunch. I have this idea, this idea, this idea, let's make one of each. Let's spend the next couple of days to do everything you can in your power to just get an MVP to the table. The dumbest, simplest version of that game, and just get it to the table with somebody. And even if you have to like multi-hand it with the play all the players, right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
pick up the hand and play a card, and then walk around the table and pick up that hand and play a card, like whatever it is you have to do to like just see if the system works, do it. And then I would imagine that if you did that with like 3, 4, 5 games, and you just kept doing that until something like ignited with you, I feel like that would be a good strategy to find something that you want to work on, and maybe it's just my ADHD personality that like I'm gonna eventually catch something that I'm excited about and I'm gonna focus on, because otherwise I'm just gonna like move on. I'm just gonna that's just how my brain works, for better or worse. But yeah, that's probably my answer. Is just like, if you don't have something you're excited about, make stupid little things until you find something.
Yeah, keep trying things. Yeah, no, and I think I found that as well. Like, I definitely get stuck on ideas. But I guess when do you, and I guess we kind of already covered that, but like, when do you get, like, when you get stuck on an idea and then you realize this idea is too big for my skill level at this point? When do you personally like see that in yourself of like, I need to put this aside? I know for me, like, it's probably when at the point where I'm probably printing too many cards. The point when I realize, and I've printed the same card like 5 times and it still is not working. But I guess for you, like, when is that point?
Yeah, if I don't feel like I have a good answer to a problem, I think collaboration is the answer to that question. So if you really feel like this game is, too big for your britches, as you say, and you don't see yourself ever doing it, then yeah, I would either like try to make a simpler version of that game. Like, what's the core, what's the soul of that game, what makes it fun, and can you just mine that out of what you've made and just make something simpler, a filler game, a party game, whatever. And if that still sounds interesting and fun to you, then proceed. Otherwise, what I was saying is collaboration. I have a certain skill set, and I don't think that, I haven't designed a game on my own yet, period. I have not just like made a game alone. Maybe that's, again, just my personality, where I need somebody to like bounce ideas off of and hash things out. I imagine if I was designing a game on my own, I'd constantly be conferring with people to be like, hey, this is where I'm at, what are your thoughts? Like, I would constantly be needing, and it's just the way my brain works. I feel like if I can just hash something out and discuss it with somebody, that a lot of times I don't even need them to talk all that much. I often just need a listener, so that I can like work out the problem out loud and be like, oh, I just answered my own question. But yeah, my skill set is I'm way more of a big picture mechanics idea guy. I'm really good at the look and feel of a game and how a game should feel when you're playing it and making sure that the mechanics are working towards that. Whereas my design partner, Steve, is really great at the minutia. And so I'm kind of the macro, he's the micro. So he's really good at writing the text box for cards and balancing things, right? How many resources should be on this card? Oh, that feels like too much. That feels like too little. He's great at all that stuff. So he usually like writes the first version of all the cards. And then we either get it to the table or I'll look it over and be like, this card doesn't feed what we need it to feed into the game. So let's work on that. This card doesn't feel the way it needs to feel when it gets played because it should be creating tension in this area of the game and it's not. So I'm good at like figuring that stuff out, and he's good at like figuring out the actual details of what will work and what won't in terms of balance and that sort of thing. And when I say that, like, I'm 60% the macro and 40% the micro, and then he's the opposite. So we work really well in that way together. And, there's probably few game designers that have the ability to do all those things. Those are just two areas of game design that I just talked about. There's probably a dozen more that you're good at or not good at. So I would imagine if you're hitting a wall with something, like collaborate, work with somebody, see what they think. When you playtest with experienced designers too, and see what their ideas are. And yeah.
Oh, it's really cool. Yeah, because I think that's come up a couple times. I think one of the gals on the school page was just saying like, I kind of hit a roadblock, and I sat down with my sister and we kind of just hashed it out of how this game was supposed to look and got through those roadblocks. And it's very similar for me. And my wife may be a very unwilling victim of that. I'll come down and be like, I just can't figure this out. And she's like, okay, well, here we go. And she sits down, gets a cup of tea, and I kind of hash it out. And I'm like, that's a great idea. Thank you. And she's like, I literally didn't say anything. Like,
now you got to put her name on the box.
Exactly. Now I got to put her name on the box. And I think those kind of relationships, and I think that was one of those little blurbs that I did on school was that, the board game design is about relationships, and it's purely about relationships. I think even if you read kind of the origin or listen to the origin story of, I think even like Exploding Kittens, it was born out of this idea of his desire to build relationships with other people.
I thought you were going to say desire to murder cats, but sorry.
yeah, that actually, but yeah, it was he wanted to build relationships with his niece and nephew, and he realized that the game design that he was doing at that time, because I think it was Elan, I think it's Elan is the guy who is the main designer for Exploding Kittens, but he was a designer for Xbox. And he realized, like, me creating games for Xbox is actually not building relationships, because I walked in this house and I said hi to my niece and nephew and they didn't even turn around and look at me. And so he was like, I'm going to stop this and I'm going to do this. And he started making board games. And so I think that's like really it's at the heart of board games is that sort of that sitting across the table with someone else, physically moving pieces around on a table. And it doesn't always look like that, because sometimes the person you're playing with is playing Tabletop Simulator halfway across the world. Or we're here in this podcast talking to each other about this. But you can that's definitely just a crucial part the key part of board game design. Yeah. So yeah, we make it through the playtesting period, right? That's probably like the longest section of board game design is just playing the game again and again and again. And if you have that good partner, right, what kind of gets you through that? I guess what would be fun to talk about is maybe that last 10% or that last 1% of the game before you send it to the publisher or send it to the printer to get it to send it out into the world. So what does that look like?
Yeah, I joke, and I on my very first game design, I remember we were at that 2-month period, where like the game was probably 80% of what it is now, really, really quickly. And then, fast forward 3, 4, 5, 6 months, we made such little progress there, right? Because we had a huge amount of progress quickly. and then balancing and tweaking and all that stuff, which is like the kind of the part of the tedious part of board game design. So I remember making a joke probably 6 months in, is that like the first 80% was easy. It's the second 80% that's like, I'm not great at math, but it's it's that second 80%. That last 20% feels more, is actually more the real 80%, right? That first 80% is actually really 20%. It's like, so I kept making that joke. I was like, man, this second 80% is like really like taking a long time. Yeah. But it's fun.
Design partner does the math, right? That's
yeah. So yeah, it's just, it's tough, but I the way that we did it was we just had scheduled calls, and it was just two people. It was just the two of us, right? Yeah. So it made it a little bit easier because we didn't have to constantly find playtesters.
Yeah.
Though finding playtesters is a little bit easier these days. There's lots of groups and, Discord servers and all kinds of places that you can do that, especially if you're designing online. But yeah, we had just like decided that every Tuesday, I don't remember what it was, our schedule, but like every Tuesday night and every Friday night, whatever, we would get together. And so we had no choice but to just like keep pushing the needle. And you talk about like, when are you ready to press play? When are you ready to send it to the printers, or when are you ready to send it to, publishers? The game is like, one thing, like we self-published, right? So we were like, do the Kickstarter thing, and like the game was on Kickstarter, and we were still tweaking. We were still making minor changes. And it's when you get to the point, for us, I guess I should say, for us, it was when we got to the point where the changes were so minimal that they barely had an impact on the game anymore. So like, yes, we could probably we could tweak forever. The game's never done, like literally never done. It just has to be done enough. And they say, what's that saying, that perfect is the enemy of great, or good enough, or something?
Yeah.
But perfection is the.
I always say perfect is good enough, but maybe.
Well, good enough is perfect is actually what it is. Is like, if you're getting to the point, like you could tweak forever, literally, right? And when you get to the point where the changes you're making are fairly minimal, if like, ask yourself, if I didn't make these changes, would the game be like much worse? Would it make much of a difference at all in the like Johnny's 8th game that he plays in 2 years from now? Is he going to notice? No. Or does it matter? It's one of 150 games that person's going to play that year.
Yeah.
So they're going to play it, 3-4 times over the course of a couple of years or whatever, does that little tweak make a difference? So I guess that's probably where we got to a point where we're like, we're making these changes, but like, are we wasting our time? Should we be working on other stuff? Should we be working on another game? Should we be working on an expansion? Should we be doing other stuff instead of like making this like 96% great game 96.3%? Should we really looking for that 0.3%? So yeah, I would say that that's what it is. Your game is never done, but I would say the other thing I would mention in this kind of like corner of the design space is like, have an MO. I don't know if that's the right, or have a mission statement, I guess is what it is. What is this game trying to accomplish? So for Fermi Paradox, this trick taking game that I'm currently working on, the idea is that it's a kind of a standard trick taking game, must follow. There's trump involved, and you've got 4 suits, 12 cards each suit. So it's pretty straightforward trick taking, but every card is split into 2 zones: the trick taking zone and the contract fulfillment zone. And on the trick taking zone of the card is our resources. So sometimes trading resources, sometimes upgrading resources, sometimes just gaining resources. Some of them you have to meet prerequisites, others you don't. Sometimes you have to follow suit, sometimes you have to lead with the card, sometimes you have to win the trick. And there's all kinds of these different things that you have to accomplish when you play the card into a trick, and then you'll get resources from it. And then the bottom part of every single card is the contract. And at the end of the round, there are a certain amount of cards that you will not play over the course of the trick taking. And those cards end up being your contract fulfillment cards. So you
Ah,
take all the resources that you gained over the course of the round and you can fulfill the contract on those cards. And so, all that to say, the mission statement for this card game is that every time you pick up your hand of cards, you'll have 11 cards in your hand, and there's 3 you won't play.
yeah.
So which one of these am I setting aside as contracts, and which one of these am I going to use for trick taking? And that puzzle of like looking at your hand and deciphering that, and is the mission statement, is the tension of that puzzle and figuring out that puzzle and making that puzzle fun and interesting, and making it, once you've decided, making it fun and interesting and difficult and full of tension to actually play your cards in such a way that's going to gain you the resources you need to fulfill your contracts. So that was sort of the mission statement, the tension and the puzzle when you first pick up your hand, and what am I going to do with this mess? And so every decision, every time we asked ourselves a question, should we do it this way or that way? Should we include this in the game? Should we include that in the game? Every time we're saying, does it serve the mission statement? Does it serve the reason I'm making this game? Because sometimes we make decisions because we think it's cool, because we think it'll be fun in that moment to do it that way. But if it takes away from what you're trying to accomplish in your mission, the main mission statement of your game, you can't do it that way. For Kuiperium, one of the main things was like we wanted a super rules light game with tons of complexity in the decision making. That was one of our main points in our mission statement. So I don't know how many times Steve and I thought like, man, it would be cool if we did this, this, and this. And it's like, yeah, but that means we have to write 2 more rules. And there's an exception to this card now. And there's an exception to when we play that card in that way now because we implemented that rule. So let's scrap it and keep it simple. So that was our mission statement for Kuiperium, amongst a few other things, but the main one was like super rules light, very easy to learn to play the game, but tons of complexity in the decision making. All the complexity would be on the cards and in the play. So yeah, all that to say, mission statement, and make sure that every decision serves that mission statement.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And sort of like the core of that mission statement is right, because the core of every game is that you're creating interesting options for
Decisions,
your players to do, right? Like interesting choices, right? If they don't have interesting choices, you probably don't have a game, right? Like you think about even like sports, which are like, the earliest form of a game per se, right? All those sports are based off of interesting choices, and sports are often it's made in real time. And then when you get down to the board game, right? If you got some of the earliest board games like checkers, right? It's all those interesting choices that you have to decide, okay, what is going to be the best choice that I make? And that trick taking game is such a great example of that, right? Because you probably have those cards in your hand, and some of those contracts are worth a lot of points, right? And some of them are not worth that many points. But those ones that aren't worth much points, they might be easier to accomplish, where those harder ones might be harder to do. And you don't know if you're actually going to draw the right cards to actually get to that point where you're actually going to fulfill that contract. And those are the interesting choices, right? That's what Ticket to Ride is all based off of, right? It's like seeing those big contracts and being like, this is the one that can probably win me the game. But then you never make it to Hamburg or whatever map you're playing. You never make it to New York.
Yeah.
So there's really games they're all based off of that choice, like those interesting choices. So I guess, when you make that statement of this is what I want the game to do, include in that the interesting choices, right? Because otherwise you might be like, I just want this game to make people feel happy. And it's like, okay, well,
go read a book.
You're not giving the means of making that happen.
Watch a movie or something. Yeah. Yeah, it's got to be more specific for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So we're running over, I think, a little over an hour now. It's been great chatting. I guess it'd be cool to just touch on maybe a couple more things if you got the time.
Yep, I've got time.
Okay, cool. How soon do you start marketing, right? I think that's a big part of that. A lot of people don't realize, right? You don't just go to Kickstarter with I've got a game. Hey, everybody, here it is. And your mom, tosses in, $50 to get a copy and you're off to the races. it's not like that, right? So like, how early did you guys kind of start that journey of like saying, hey, we have this game, and kind of reaching out to those people that you might think were interested in it?
Yeah, as soon as you're sure you're going to Kickstarter. So
Mm.
like as soon as you made the decision like this is happening, you need to get a Kickstarter landing page ready to go. And I'm probably not using the right terminology there, but whatever the I think landing page or
Yeah, that works.
yeah. And all it is just a 16 by 9 image. I think it's 16 by 9
Yeah.
image and and a button that says like follow this project or whatever. That's all it
Yeah.
is. There's nothing else. It's just an image. So I think like as soon as you're sure you want to go to Kickstarter and that's the path you're going to take, even if you're nowhere near ready, you know, you're like this game still needs. I have enough here to know that this game is going to be a thing, and it's going to exist, and it's good enough that I want to put it on Kickstarter and I want to do this. That's the moment you should probably like start working with a. I mean, if you're serious about doing it, you should, you know, whether it's find art or you know, pay an artist or whatever, just to get one image done and get it up there with, you know, the title of your game. It is something interesting that's going to catch people's attention, and then you could start doing like, you know, super. You could even start really small, right? And do things like you could do $1 a day on Facebook advertising or whatever. And if people find that image interesting, and you could just start collecting emails, right? And then that's sort of what we did, is just like drip feed emails.
Yeah.
And it's super slow, but you don't probably don't want to go spending a ton of money. But if you could spend a couple bucks a day or a buck a day or just whatever your budget is, and you could do that for a year, you know, before your Kickstarter actually launches. But at least you've got slowly but surely building people into that funnel, you know, because ultimately like only whatever, I don't know what the numbers are, 15-20% or less probably of those people are actually going to. I'm not the marketing guy on the team, just going to put that out there, but I have learned, you know, a decent amount. And so I'm just kind of like regurgitating some of the stuff that I've learned a little bit from watching my partner Max, who's the marketing guy on our team, kind of do this stuff. And obviously we're a team and we kind of make decisions together and decide things together and budget and whatnot. So I have a decent idea. That's why I like this terminology and like exact amounts and blah, blah, blah is probably not my forte. But I would say like as soon as you're sure you're doing it on Kickstarter, get that landing page up. And maybe you're not spending a lot of money, but if you could just like drip feed a little bit of money and just get a little bit of attention on that project, and slowly but surely as you get closer and closer and closer, you can increase that budget. And then, you know, in the last month or weeks before you launch, you probably want to go big. And then over the course of the campaign, you probably want to stay big in terms of like your marketing dollars or the percentage of your marketing dollars. You know, it should look something like that until you're kind of like wrapping up your campaign. So I would say as soon as you know for sure that this game is going to Kickstarter and you're doing it, even if the game's not ready, you want to start, you know, get that minimum page up. It's not a lot of time or money or effort to put into it, and it's something that, you know, if you spend a year drip feeding emails, like getting an email here and an email there. When I say email, I just mean people that are interested in the project. They'll get an email when you launch, right? And those are the people that you want to like slowly but surely build, you know. And that might actually inform when you're ready to launch, because a lot of times you don't know when you're ready to launch, and you're just gonna like, the goal is spring, but it might be summer, we'll see. Spring comes along and you're like, the numbers aren't quite where I wanted them to be, so you delay till summer, maybe, you know. You just don't make any promises until you're ready to make a promise. So that's kind of the approach that we took with Kuiperium, my one project that I did on Kickstarter. Mind you, Max, our partner, I think he's done like 8 or 10 by now at this point.
Oh, wow.
Over the course of his career.
Wow. Yeah, no, I think that's really, I think it should be encouraging, right? To the audience is like, right. It's not rocket science, right? You put up an image on Kickstarter, and you start just doing a little bit of advertising to try to just kind of draw those people in and see what kind of interest is out there. And I don't know, maybe there would be a determining factor of like, maybe you're like, you've been doing that for a year and there's not much feedback in that realm. And then there might be other things that you might need to think about, like, well, maybe is my game themed wrong, or maybe the image that I got made by the artist isn't interesting enough for people to be interested in looking at, or maybe my messaging was just not right, or maybe my targeting was not right. But I've heard Facebook is actually really good at targeting the right audience for the most part. And so, I've heard that Facebook is probably one of the better places to kind of do that marketing. And it's also encouraging to see that, it's actually not that expensive to kind of just trickle feed that.
Yeah, exactly.
With some little marketing dollars. Obviously, there's different marketing options. We're specifically talking about, or not marketing, but publishing options. We're specifically talking about going through Kickstarter, because that's your experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, yeah. There's some like more like very specific like self-publishing, right? There's a lot of different sites that you can put up your print and play. If you're making a very simple game, you can put your print and play up there, and people will then download it. I know some of them, they require you to submit it, and then they will review it and whether they want to put it on their website or not. Or you can just put it up on your own website, however you want to do that. And then a lot of people will go the traditional route, where they will pitch to publishers, and right, there's a lot of like speed dating, and a lot of publishers that they're open for submissions, and you just submit to them. There's a lot of different competitions that are kind of almost disguised publishing opportunities, where you submit your game and it kind of goes through a process where they play test your game, and on the other end they go no or yes, right? I actually got some feedback recently from some different publishers that I've kind of submitted to, and see if they would want to publish my game. And I'm just kind of right now exploring, like, would someone be interested in publishing my game or not? And so that is another option, is just to start sending it out to publishers and see if they will do. And they more or less do a lot of that for you as far as the marketing side and lining up all that side of things. Yeah. So when it's all said and done, successfully published Kuiperium, right? And I guess on the other side of that, like, what did that look like? Like, did you become a millionaire? Was it like just enough to be like, okay, we're set to make the next game? Like, we don't want to set the expectations too high, right? So, like, what does that look like?
Yeah, when you're self-publishing, unless you've got a massive hit on your hands, which is like super rare, and like, again, this is my opinion, but like, the amount of money you put into it is going to sway things, right? And we didn't have a huge budget, but we stretched ourselves, and we spent probably maybe more than we should have. I don't know. It's hard to say, because like ultimately we ended up printing 1,000 copies. So it was a very small print run. We sold 300 or so of those on the original Kickstarter, which helped pay for some of the marketing dollars. It helped pay for some of the manufacturing and the freight and shipping and all that stuff, right? At the end of the day, we ended up with a debt. We've now sold out of our copies. Once we basically partnered with Quartermaster Logistics, and they basically work with Universal Distribution, which is a retail distribution, wholesale distribution company that, basically any board game store can purchase from them. And the way Quartermaster Logistics does it is that because they have tons of stuff in their warehouse, they're able to kind of like give their catalog of games, including Kuiperium and a whole bunch of other indie games and smaller games and whatever, along with probably some more well-known games as well, make those available to the stores.
Yeah.
And then because a store doesn't have to order a case off of me, they could order 2 games along with 2 other games and 4 other games and 6 other games from Quartermaster Logistics. They're able to kind of bundle up and make it so that a store doesn't have to invest a whole case full of games of Kuiperium, right? So it's a bigger risk for them.
Exactly.
So that being said, it worked out fairly well. Quartermaster Logistics made Kuiperium available through Universal in that way that I just described. And then within, I want to say 4 or 5 months of it becoming available that way, they sold almost all our copies. So we're down to like in the single digits, I think, honestly. I think last time I looked, we were at 17 copies left in the Quartermaster's warehouse. And then I have probably a couple of boxes, probably about the same amount left in my garage here at home.
Wow.
So all that to say, when everything was said and done after selling our first 1,000 games, we're still in the hole. We're still, we did not make any money, but we have a game out there. And, this is kind of like, if you want to self-publish, and this is just my own opinion, if you want to self-publish games, you can have a game made and have it mostly paid for, probably, by your crowdfunding campaign. And then depending on how much money you spent and how efficient you were with your marketing dollars and that, like, you could probably end up somewhere near even, depending on the size of your game and everything else that kind of impacted it. We also paid like COVID shipping prices, so we paid a little bit more for that as well. So I think that if you're deciding that you want to self-publish, you probably want to put yourself in a scenario where or you're going to be able to self-publish multiple games over the course of a decade or X amount of years.
Yes.
And the reason I say that is because now Dragon Egg Games, which is kind of our publishing company, me and Steve as designers and Kuiperium itself have carved out a little space in the board game world. And what I mean by that is that if you Google Kuiperium or you go on BGG, you're going to see an 8.1 rating on BGG. You're going to see a Dice Tower review with a seal of approval. You're going to see, a dozen other small videos, podcasts, whatever, all of those places with almost completely positive reviews and comments and whatnot for Kuiperium. So we have like all of that, like, despite being a little bit in the hole right now, we didn't just pay for Kuiperium to get made, right?
Yes.
We've also now paid for carved out a little area and a certain amount of reputation. And reputation, not necessarily in the way that, like, if you went out on the street, even to your local board game store, and asked about Matt Cousineau or Kuiperium, they probably wouldn't know. But if you Googled it, and if you did some research, like a lot of us do as board gamers, if I see a game come out by a designer and I'm like, oh, I've never heard of this guy, or from the same studio that brought you Kuiperium, that's when I'll Google. That's when I'll go look at reviews and be like, oh, there's actually a little bit of pedigree behind that. There's actually, like, we have some fans. There's about 1,000 people out there, roughly, that do know what Kuiperium is, right?
Yeah.
So now we're working towards publishing Fermi Paradox. That's going to happen in 2026. We're looking at doing a second edition of Kuiperium. We sold out. It seems like there's still a little bit some demand there, and a demand for this type of game in the hobby. So it feels like if we do a second edition, it could do okay. So the idea is that your first project kind of sets your roots, and then the second project maybe solidifies that a little bit, and then the third project maybe you start making money, because you're building your fan base and you're building your email list and you're kind of getting more and more of a reputation. So all that to say, we haven't achieved any of that yet, but that's the goal. That's the game plan, right? So if you're planning on doing a one and done and expecting to make money, maybe you're an outlier and maybe you do achieve that. And I think it's very possible, but I don't think it's the most probable outcome. The most probable outcome is that, your game performs to the quality of your game. So if your game is really well rated and really well respected and has reviews and the art and the graphic design looks good and it's easy to get to the table and etc., then you can set a foundation to build on from there. So that's kind of like my very minimal experience and feeling from self-publishing and going the route of the crowdfunding and that kind of thing. So if you're not kind of willing to go multiple projects and try to build that foundation and build your fan base and build the email list and do all that grassroots marketing and whatever, then you're probably better off just like making a game and pitching to publishers until hopefully one gets picked up. That's maybe the better route for you. Again, I'm like, take all this with a grain of salt. This is my experience. I have one game published and I'm, probably only 5 or 6 years into, quote unquote, being a game designer and working on that side of my career.
Yeah, that's really good. And like, this is not to discourage anyone, right? Because ultimately, like, if creating board games is ultimately is about bringing other people joy, right? And having that fun time with building that community. And so even if your game is something that you just merely play with your immediate friends or family, and you guys enjoy it and that's fun, that's great. Like, you've accomplished something. You've become a game designer ultimately.
That's an achievement for sure.
Yeah. But I mean, there's still that idea of like, yeah, what if 1,000 people played my game, right? And what if I did have that rating on BGG that was 8.1 or whatnot? Like, that's amazing. Like, that's cool. And that's really what we want to do is, like, with this short podcast or hour long, almost hour and a half long podcast is really, we just want to encourage you to keep designing. And like, this is Matt's experience, right? Through designing a board game. And your route might be different. And that's totally fine. Different games grow different legs and they go different directions. But in the end, the whole hobby is about having fun and just having that moment of escape and joy and community with someone else. And obviously there's solo games, which have become a huge part of the hobby now as well. But
to add to that thought, like, you know, this like if I quit right now designing board games and I never made another penny, I still look at Kuiperium like a success for me. So despite having lost money on it, okay, like literally so far we're losing money on Kuiperium. We're not done yet. We're doing the second edition and we're going to build on that. But so far we've lost money on Kuiperium. But I made a game and my name's on a box. And I feel like that's a major accomplishment. It's a huge badge of honor for me personally. I've walked into random board game stores and seen Kuiperium there, seen my name on a box in a random board game store that I never had any contact with before. Yeah. That is an incredible feeling.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's varying levels of success for sure. And I 100% agree with what you just said. Like, if you make a game and you just print it yourself and you play it with your friends and a half a dozen people in your game group or in your town own the game or play the game on here and there, or even just once and have a good time, that's something, you know? So I do not, you know, if I were to quit today and never make another penny and never make another game, I would still look at my design journey with Kuiperium as a massive success because it's a thing that I did and it's out there, you know? Yeah. So I think that's, you know, I don't want to discourage people and say like, oh, you're going to lose money on your first game. Yeah. You know, if you self-publish, maybe you will, you know, but it just depends on what you want to do with it and what your goals are. And I think just setting expectations and knowing what you're getting into and really educating yourself, which is what we're all doing here, right, is going to be a huge kind of put you in the right direction and give you a little bit of guidance instead of walking in blind and maybe making some mistakes or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of my final message is just like, you know, varying degrees of success. The success is defined by yourself, you know, and you just do what you think is going to, you know, move you towards your own version of success.
Yeah. So with that, thank you guys so much for joining us and just spending the time to kind of walk through the journey with Matt and his success with Kuiperium. I mean, we could say it's a success because you got it printed, right? You have your name on a box. It's out there. You guys are working on the second print run, the second edition. And so I guess we just kind of closing out, Matt, like where can people find you and just where you're working on this next project, this trick-taking game? Like, where can they find you?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I would say the best place to kind of follow if you want to is I have a podcast, a board game podcast called Dice Camera Action. So if you go to Dice Camera Action, if my Instagram is probably the place where I would post the most stuff, and the easiest place to reach me. So Dice Camera Action Pod is my Instagram handle. Dice Camera Action also has a Facebook page, and then obviously I'm on Facebook, Matt Cousineau. So if you find me through either of those things, and then I have a link tree that I'll actually give to you, and you can kind of post along with this to just kind of follow all our stuff. Yeah, my podcast, Dice Camera Action, is not about me or my game design journey or any of that. It's about just It's about reviewing board games and movies. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. But if anytime I have a major event happening where I'm launching something or whatever, like I'm going to talk about it on the podcast. I'm going to post about it on my Instagram and Facebook. It's going to be all of those places. So, yeah, I'll drop a link tree where you can kind of check out my stuff and follow my journey along as well.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. And we will see you next time. And hopefully we can do some more interviews like this.